Good morning, Soul Scholars. Dr. Mill here today for our social media live training where we are talking about setting smart goals for equity growth. So I am excited to be here today. If you are watching, give me a hey, what's up in the comments. Tell me what state you're coming from. As you see, I am traveling right now, but I promised to come on live, so I wanted to stay committed to what I promised to do and provide you with a bit of value for about 30 minutes as we talk about SMART goals. So this opportunity, this webinar, this online training is for leaders who are interested in developing their culturally responsive school leadership that underlies with social emotional learning and student academic growth. Okay, so those have to be your goals, which should be the goal of every leader in schools, is to grow our students academically and behaviorally. So in this live, the goal will be to actually visualize and track your progress towards your goals in growing your culturally responsive school leadership capacity. The focus for today is on SMART goals. And so we'll talk about what SMART goals are very briefly because most of us know what that is. But how can we use SMART goals to implement and build a culturally responsive school through our culturally responsive school leadership? Okay. And so I've also created a freebie that I will post to each event site within the next couple of days. There will be a mini course for school leaders who are looking to handle and navigate teacher resistance, because there's always going to be resistance in most spaces when you're implementing and bringing something new. So that mini course will provide you with a handbook that will walk you through some steps on how to actually navigate teacher resistance and push equity change. So if you're interested in that, just stay tuned um, to the event pages here, or you can leave your email in the comments and I'll make sure to get that to you. So let's get back to defining what culturally responsive school leadership is. We talked about that last week, but we must understand this definition of culturally responsive school leadership so we're able to make the right type of goals. Goals that are centered around equity, that are centered around growing our students and building a culturally responsive school. So, culturally responsive school leadership is the ability of those leaders in education, those teachers in these classrooms, to recognize, respect, and effectively address the diverse cultural backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives of students and their families. Okay. So that means we're involved in creating inclusivity and an equitable learning environment where every student feels valued, respected, and understood, regardless of their cultural, ethnic, linguistic, or socioeconomic, background. Right. So the leaders, the teachers, they address and they include and they radically welcome and make space for belonging for diverse students, right? They're ensuring that they're acknowledging and including their backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives. Right. And that means including those things in decision making processes, not just in celebrations for holidays, not just during times where we're recognizing young people and inviting families along the way. We're talking about making decisions about policies, making decisions about procedures, about curriculum, and about instruction. Okay. Another part of culturally responsive school leadership is we're adapting our teaching methods and our curriculum and policies to ensure that we're meeting the unique needs of students, right? If we meet their unique needs, because in education, it seems to be this monolithic, traditional, one size fits all perspective when it comes to educating our young people in the classroom. So if we can work towards diversifying the way that we teach and the way we engage our young people, we can work to close and eliminate these disparities we see in students being hyper referred to special education courses, or being underrepresented, our Black and brown students being underrepresented in AP courses, or even like in my state of Arkansas, being threatened with taking away African American AP courses, right? And we had to have families and teachers really fight for that course to stay in our schools and be counted just like all the others, right? So students get those opportunities to take that credit into college and to earn their passing score during their exam. So when you're talking about culturally responsive school leadership, that sort of thing would have never been an issue because we actually understand through curriculum, through what we're presenting and how we are presenting it, we are giving that to our students in unique and diverse ways. Okay. Then the last part of culturally responsive school leadership is that it promotes cultural humility. And remember, we talked about cultural humility being the piece where you are a lifelong learner, and you're working to address any disparities, any signs of oppression, any types of gaps that, if you look at the root of the gap that we may have, whether it's academic, whether it's behavioral, you tend to see in the gap that somebody's not being served well. Right. And so we are, because we're looking at root issues, not just fruit, when we're talking about culturally responsive school leadership. This is a deep practice, right? So through cultural humility, the space where I am open to always learning about the people that I serve, not believing I'm culturally competent and I know everything there is to know about this group of people with these labels, is being open to them informing you and giving you a real rounded picture of who you're serving, right? So when you're doing this, you're making a commitment to social justice within education. And I don't mean students engaging in social justice education. There is justice, there is fairness, there is access, there is inclusivity, there is a radical welcoming of people showing up in ways of being that are natural to them, and everybody having that playing field where they're being met with equity, meaning their needs are being met no matter how diverse they are. Not everybody getting the same thing and saying we're loving all of our students and giving them all the same quality or level of engagement in education and content. It's about making sure that I'm seeing who's in my classroom. I'm seeing who's in my school building. I'm recognizing their strengths, but I also see spaces for them to grow. And I use their cultural interests. I use the things I know about my students to engage them in high quality instruction that actually interests them and moves them from one academic level to the next. Okay. So when we're talking about culturally responsive school leadership, that is what we mean. In your decision making, in the way you show up in front of your children, your young people, the teachers that you serve, the instructional staff that you have, all of those things, right, are met through a lens of I love the people around me. I am here to help everybody win. And I'm creating environments where our staff, our students, our teachers, their families feel safe to be who they are. And knowing that who they are will be access to an opportunity to learn more, just to enhance their identities, not tear them down, not isolate them, not marginalize them, not otherize them. Okay. So I want to be very clear. And there are some other distinct things about culturally responsive school leadership, but that's the belief system, right? And that's what the belief system actually looks like in real time. And I do that work from I want to credit the work of Muhammad Khalifa in culturally responsive school leadership. It's an amazing text that really breaks down through a case study of what culturally responsive school leadership looks like and how to actually enact that. It has so many actionable steps and questions and activities for principals, school leaders, teachers, community stakeholders to engage in, to walk this journey, because that's what we talked about last week. This is a journey. So walking this journey and committing to the marathon of this work, knowing it's not going to happen in a sprint. You're not going to get everything resolved within a few months, within a year. It takes long game understanding. But in the long game, you have to have goals set up, right? So, of course, you can look at setting goals before we get into the clarity of goals. You can look at setting goals through a long term or a short term lens. So long term could be 3 years, long term could be 5 years, long term could be 10 years, right? And so for most folks who are like district leaders, they may look out further, right? In my opinion, it would be best to look out further so that you have a grand scope of how you want to engage your schools that are within that district into this long-term work of expanding the identity that this district, that this school is for everybody, right? The way they do education in there, every child has no excuse to fail, right? When I was teaching in class and I had young people, I always let them know you don't have an opportunity to fail in my class. Why? Because I'm meeting every child. I'm tapping in with families. I'm figuring out I'm going to counselor, figuring out if there are some background issues or different things that I need to be made aware of. Why do I need to know all of that information? Right? Why do I need to talk to students one on one? Why do I need to have conversations with families? Right? And even as an instructional coach and being in instructional leadership, pushing the teachers that I was supporting, that you've got to make these connections. Why? Because this gives you data. And the data is what you need to be equitable. But the data, again, notice I didn't say test scores. It includes those things, right? But that's only one narrow perspective or one narrow component of real data. It doesn't give you a full picture. So as leadership, if you don't have set up within your meeting protocols, your discussion protocols, meaning the way in which you engage in looking at data in those conversations, if there is not space, ample space for you to be discussing who these young people are behind the numbers, you're not going to ever meet equity, because equity can't be narrow-minded and it can't be siphoned into one thing, which is numerical data, looking at test scores, or even looking at just the percentages behind how many students have had disciplinary referrals or been suspended or expelled. That's not going to be enough. You got to get the stories. You got to have conversations. You got to see this as a state of emergency, that I've got to have the voices of the people that I'm serving. So in making these goals, you're collecting data, because the first part is going to be clarity and focus. You got to be able to know your SMART goals should provide a clear and specific target. And it's going to help you stay focused as a leader on what you want to achieve on this journey. So remember, I said you can do a 3-year, 5-year, 10-year long-term goal setting. But within the time frame to meet that long-term goal, you're setting up smaller short-term goals. So these goals could be broken down. Let's say you're going with a 3-year plan. And that's what I suggest for most schools I start to do the work with. I'm like, you've got to give this work about 3 years, right? At least 3 years to start seeing some actual change, to start seeing some things actually shift in teacher attitudes, and the type of quality of instruction, and even with student and family outcomes, and how much more families are engaged. You got to give that time. So if I'm doing a 3-year long term and now I've got a 1-year goal, because I'm looking at this school year, and a lot of people already do this, right, with your strategic planning or whatever you call it in your school, where you plan for the year ahead. But within that year goal, you got to be focused on equity, right? So I'm going to share my screen really quick, because I want you all excuse me. Let me get to that. Oh, here it is. I went right past it. I want you all to look at how, when you are working with schools, when I'm working with schools, but I tell leaders, when you are working with your staff, what I did with this cohort is called the Leadership with Soul cohort, and it's going on now. And what I did with these principals, assistant principals, and instructional coaches is first had them to identify their own individual goals, or I'm sorry, their own individual values, right? So we took them through a series of activities where they would, for one activity, find out what are their top 3 values based on the list here. And you're welcome to take a picture of this list, utilize this list, or you add to it whatever comes to heart for you as it relates to equity. So these are goals that are centered around equity. So if your school building, the focus is on equity, starting with your values have to be surrounded around equity, right? It's got to be centered around that. If we're just collecting values that are about anything, everything doesn't make sure it includes equity. We know that in this country. So we can't assume that equity is the framework for our normal state of being in this country. So we create space where these types of values, and you could have added many more, but they're used to help them create and connect with their own individual values. Then we took the individual values and we got with leadership teams. So one campus was with their principal, assistant principal, instructional coach. Another one was in another breakout room with their same staff. And this leadership now brings all of what they have together and decides, based on all of our values, let's bring this down to selecting a top 3 for our leadership team. And now they're planning on how to bring their values in front of the staff, and then take the practice to a staff set of values. What is our school set of values, right? What is for the school staff? That's from the custodial workers, that's from the cafeteria staff. Everybody's involved in creating values for the school. And then you could go a step further. Now we could talk about values for your specific departments, right? Because maybe there are different goals that have to be set if we're talking about the SPED department versus the 7th grade math department, right? They may share some things, but there may also be some things they want to make sure they focus on in their area of expertise. Okay. So, hey, Brooke. So, I want us to make sure that we're looking at those values, right? So I just wanted to share. I'll take off of sharing that, but I just wanted to share something that I do with the leadership and something that has really worked well. Okay. So another part, you got your long-term goals and you set those goals, and now you have clarity and focus because your goals that you set are related on the values you've already selected. So you can't set goals if you don't have values, because the goals are going to reflect the meaning and the intentionality of the values that you all have set. Another part of the SMART goals are those measurable outcomes, right? So we're looking at being able to track and determine whether or not you're making these meaningful strides in cultural responsiveness, right? So leadership got to be thinking about, as you setting these goals, you're getting clear and specific on what it is you want. And now you're setting these goals. You got to be able to think, how am I going to track this and see progress? And if you stay till the end, I've got some activities that I'm going to explain out. And one of them is about tracking your goals, right? So just stay tuned for that. I'll bring that in towards the end. So we've got their specific, the S for SMART, specific, clear goals connected to your values, right? So maybe even with the values, you break those values down and let them see, how do these values show up in teacher and student engagement, in family and front office engagement, in cafeteria and student engagement, in teacher and janitorial engagement, right? Like, what does this look like? What things are being said? How are people being treated? Because you got to get real specific and give real scenarios so people can actually put what do I want to say? The concrete beside the abstract. They can actually begin to talk about what it is and even what it's not, right? Because there can be, if somebody's word was authenticity and then somebody discusses putting your emotions on the back burner, well, that's not being authentic to what's happening in your body and the emotions you are experiencing and how they will impact your decisions while you're at work, while you're teaching, while you're leading. So then that's something we would say is not a descriptor of what authenticity is, because we need to know that since we selected that as a value. Okay. And so that means either getting with somebody that can help you flesh through those equitable traits and either consult you on how to create this into a PLC or professional development, or bringing someone else in, or just referencing a book that's on equity and leadership, but finding some real source to help you in planning how this is going to go out and how you're going to flesh out the meaning and clarity of the focal goals that you're going to have. So specific is very, very important. And then the M is measurable. So how are we going to track these goals? Now we got to the A, achievable outcomes. So the leaders, right? We've got to make sure that when we're working with our teams, we're selecting goals that are attainable, right? They're specific. I can clearly target what it looks like for this goal to be in place, right? So we know the values, I can get there, but then I also know that this goal can be achieved within a semester, or within a 9 weeks, or within a school year, right? And these are the indicators that we're getting there, right? But it's attainable, because this way, leaders, you can, if it's something that people can do, even if it's something that everybody may not feel like they can do, but you've got a few, or it can happen, now you're able to bring your confidence and your motivation, because that's going to be important. I talked about emotional intelligence yesterday in a meeting with the leadership team, and we were talking about, do you believe that your emotions matter the most? And a lot of leaders were conflicted, because some interpreted that to mean that my emotions matter, um, and nobody else's does. So then there was this response about, I put my emotions on the back burner and I don't bring them up. But when we talk about emotional intelligence, we're recognizing that I've got to understand that my emotions really impact the way I provide motivation and confidence. If I don't have a good connection with what we're doing, how can I lead positive change? Then it becomes just something on their list to do, and they don't really see that there is a possibility. People don't have to see that this has happened in real time all the time. They can just see that there is possibility. They can imagine that this can happen. But those things, again, are based a lot about what we believe about the young people that we teach. See, leadership's got to actually see in their staff, do they really believe? Because a lot of stuff, a lot of resistance that you're getting is not that the teachers can't do the thing. They don't believe the students can do the thing. And sometimes they don't believe that they can do the things with certain groups of students. So you got to get in and really identify where you need to strategize, where you need to be putting your efforts, your money, the decisions you're making for the school. Because if you keep, again, attending to fruit, you will never get to the root, and you'll have all these goals and you won't see long-term attainment of the goals, and then a pathway towards sustainability. Because the goals are no good if we're only pushing forth goals for the sake of making goals, right? So we got to actually think about that. And then the R is relevance to equity. So again, if we're looking back at our values, and our values are centered around equity and cultural responsiveness, and radical welcoming and radical belonging and liberation, and anti-racism, anti-oppression, period. If you're looking at those as the way you're making your goals, you're on the right track, because now you're emphasizing how important it is to create inclusive and equitable learning environments, right? It must be that way. It must be that way. I see a comment, Brooke says, how do those values actually feel? Yeah, your values are going to always reflect. And that's what I was talking about with emotional intelligence. As leaders, you've got to be tapped into your own scope of emotions. What emotions do you experience the most? What emotions impact you when you're leading people? From feeling deflated sometimes if you're putting something together and you don't get buy-in, to feeling joy when you see a connection you made with a parent. Thinking about how those emotions actually reflect what connects to my values, right? Because authenticity makes me feel safe. right? So I feel calm. I feel peaceful, right? Because now when I'm calm and I'm peaceful, I'm also able to engage in deeper thought and deeper analysis, right? The thinking process is deepened because my value of authenticity makes me feel safe and calm. Now, my amygdala is deactivated, so it doesn't pose or perceive a threat, it perceives safety. So my brain is now relaxed enough to come out of the amygdala and flourish in the frontal lobe, the neocortex, where I can imagine and create and problem solve and read deeply, feel deeply, engage in I can do all these creative things now because my amygdala has calmed. Okay. So thinking about relevance to equity is important. The R and the T is time bound. So this goes back to, we've been talking about the long term and the short term goals. So setting these time bound goals adds urgency and accountability, but they can't only be activated or the timelines be set by the leaders. This is where you lose folks when you don't engage them in the planning steps and the implementation steps of the work. They need to be telling you what is a good time frame that they can see this happen where they're not hyper stressed. Because now we move into compliance, you all. And compliance is a part of schooling, not educating. So if we're only doing things for compliance sakes, now we're getting into performative measures where we're doing things just to check off the equity checklist, just to say that we've done the thing. So when we're making these time-bound deadlines, we understand we work against a sense of urgency, which is a trait of white supremacy culture. We know those things because we're an equity team, right? So either we've had some training to really have a thorough foundation in understanding how equity or the lack of equity has created so many disparities in Black and brown communities. If we're not knowing that information already, we're not privy to redlining, we're not privy to the desegregation de facto and how those things have impacted our schools, and segregation even now in different areas of town when you've got gentrification happening. All these things, those are baseline things your equity team should be aware of. That means you need to go to somebody's conference. Somebody needs to be going through a training, through a course. I got certified. Maybe they need to go through a certification. Maybe you need to hire someone like myself or others who do the work, because we can make sure that we're not imposing the very thing our equity team or our school or our district with our equity statements on our beautiful websites, making sure we're not working against ourselves, making sure we're walking what we're talking, right? So the mission and the vision statements align with the doing, with the being that is the norm, that are the normal practices within our schools and our district buildings. Okay. So we work against the sense of urgency, but we put some time on it so that people can see it as a priority, not be hyper stressed by the urgency, but see it as a priority and something that we want to diligently work towards so that we can see how that looks in accountability, right? So that means you break down that year goal into semesters, but then you break down those semester goals into quarters. And if you meet in PLCs every month, now your person, that instructional coach or whomever that is dealing with the PLCs, breaks it down into months. So now I know by the month, this is how I'm supporting educators in building culturally responsive classrooms as the instructional coach, right? And then if I meet with my leadership team a year as the principal and assistant principal, I know I'm looking for this report to come back from this group, and I'm bringing my data since I've had to talk to more parents and things like that. I'm bringing my SMART goals into the space, right? Everybody's got their thing, right? There's an assignment for every person, department leader, curriculum leaders, instructional coaches, assistant principals. Everybody's got something that they're doing and that they're looking for, but it's all centering equity, right? So here are some examples of some of these goals. Then I'm gonna give you a few tips. So here are some examples of some culturally responsive leadership goals. Okay. Here are some examples. You want to increase the representation of diverse voices in our school's curriculum by incorporating materials from underrepresented cultures into at least 25% of lesson plans within the next 6 months, right? So that's a goal that's not a real big long term one, but because it's over months time, we can break that down to see how are we going to support teachers, what resources are we providing, what co-teaching are we doing, what modeling are we doing, because if we're the instructional coach, we should know all things about culturally responsive teaching. That's why I open up the space in my teaching from the soul cohort for instructional coaches, because how can you support the work and the instructional plans? Like, I'm talking about how can you sit down and lesson plan, not just go over data and numbers, but help these teachers lesson plan so that they are being culturally responsive. How can you work with them to create formative assessments so they can provide wise feedback? How are you working with them to observe their feedback sessions, whether it's a video, audio, or you watching, to see how they're providing wise feedback? Because the feedback is really the key. If we're doing the right type of lessons and we're including feedback loops where we know where students are along the way, we can quickly attend to what we need to do. Right. And I may have to do a whole nother live on feedback. Again, I did it a while back, but I may have to bring that back. Because that's going to be the one that's the thing that's going to carry you over from dependent learner to independent learner. It's going to be based on the feedback and how often that feedback is given. But back to my point, with this bigger goal, I'm looking at these specific things every month. Because I know as an instructional coach, I may meet with my staff, not my staff, but the team, group of teachers, my team of teachers. I may meet with them once a month or every 2 weeks. So if I'm doing every 2 weeks or even every month, I've got a monthly goal. Like, this is going to be the focus. This is what we're going to drive. This is what we're going to look at. We're going to have them bring back these student samples or this student survey about the quality of the lesson and the engagement of the lesson. Right. So that's a goal, and you're breaking it down so that you can ensure that the goal is met. And what is not met, right? Because our goals may not be met. Maybe we were 2% below our 25%. So what efforts do we need to now come back and make based on what we've learned from our previous SMART goal? Right? Do we need to give more rubrics? And this is what I love to do with the teacher labs. And this is what we're going to be doing this year with a couple of schools I'm contracted with, is we're going to get down to what does the instruction need to look like to be culturally responsive, and what do the teachers need in order to feel supported and have all of their tools for success. Right? So this is how you break that down as a larger SMART goal throughout the year, and you siphon it down to the month. I mean, you can go from the year to the semester to the quarter to the month. And those are the little short goals that you've got in between those. Okay. Another example of a SMART goal for culturally responsive school leadership: implement a professional development program on cultural humility for all staff members by the end of the academic year, with measurable progress tracked monthly. See? So that's another example. And it's focusing on cultural humility, which I've talked about earlier, which is really, really important. Okay. Next, another example: establish regular communication channels with parents and community members from diverse backgrounds to gather feedback and input for improving cultural responsiveness in our school. Powerful move, powerful goal, because now we're moving from hoarding power to sharing power. Right now we're looking at, if this is our goal, do we need interpreters? Probably so. Right, it's at least going to be one child in most schools, or a lot of schools, that would need support with interpretation. Right, it may be a family who is deaf or hard of hearing, so maybe we need to make sure we have something for that family. Right? Figuring that thing out, those are the little mini goals, the mini to-do list, the mini task list that can help us get to establishing regular communication channels. Okay? So those are some examples of culturally responsive school leadership goals. And so here are some tips, and then we're going to be out of here. If you got questions, go ahead and put them into the chat. I'd love to address any questions that we may have, but I'm going to give you a few tips. Start with self-reflection. I know you don't have time. I know things are so busy, but reflect on what you're doing now. There are some things you should be celebrating that you're doing now. Okay. And sometimes you don't know those things if you don't know some of the things you're doing are on a pathway to equity, or are on the pathway to cultural responsiveness, because you need people like me, other people who have done the work and researched the work and are still doing the work in this field, to provide you like with the scope and understanding of what it actually looks like to be a culturally responsive school, a culturally responsive teacher, a culturally responsive leader. And then you can see where you are now, but then also where you want to go, because nobody's going to have it perfect. That's a fallacy. That's a fantasy world. There is no perfection. So if I know where I am now and where I want to go, I can also be in a space to reflect on my biases and areas where I can improve. Okay. Next, prioritize equity. You gotta talk equity so much that people know when the next time you're at a staff meeting or a PLC, they know they're going to be talking about equity. They can anticipate it because it's your normal language. Everything you do, you live, you breathe, you move with equity. So your goals are contributing to creating this overall equitable experience for all students. Next, involve stakeholders. So that means you're collaborating with other folks, not just the leadership staff. And this is where we lose connection with a lot of our staff, teachers, families, students, but they don't feel like they are part of any decision. You make all the decisions as the leader, you and your team, and you tell them what's going to happen. You tell them what they're going to do. Nobody likes to be told. They might like being led, because that's what leadership is. They don't mind being led, but being told creates this restriction on their own autonomy, which is one of the foundational pieces of liberation. If you take all the power from everyone else, now you're not putting them in a space where they can flourish. And you can only flourish if you're free. Okay. Next tip, last tip. Balance your short term and long term objectives. I kind of talked about that, but include some goals that can address what needs to be responded to right now, right? Because some of the goals that you may have, you're going to see I've got some issues in my school. Like in the leadership cohort I facilitated yesterday, a principal has some things that they are going to have to address in relation to student and teacher connection and family and teacher connection. And so taking the work that we were doing about values had to be customized for her immediate need, I think within the week, right? So you take your immediate challenges, you don't put them on the back burner, because if you do, you're ignoring the opportunity to connect to your teachers by supporting them and meeting their immediate challenges. And when you do that, you show them that your concerns are valuable. What you've said in team meetings or in the anonymous box or wherever they submit concerns and issues and grievances, you're showing them that those things matter to you as the leader or the leadership team, so much that we're going to create a mini goal or a short-term goal to address that challenge, because I don't want that to be a challenge for you any longer, because we've got other things that I need your expertise and genius for. And if teachers are so exasperated by the everyday of the classroom, you're going to have to navigate resistance, large resistance. Why? Because you haven't taken something off their plate, but you're adding more. And that's one thing teachers have just asked for. If you want me to do this thing, it's not that I'm against doing this thing sometimes. It's that you want me to do this thing and my plate is overflowing. I'm only one human. So I need you to take some of these things off, or swap me out a responsibility that carries as much load as this new thing that we're doing, which should be the way, right? Equity should be the way we've been doing education, but the reality is it's not. So we're not going to complain about it all day, But we are going to say that with new things come new challenges. And if I'm not helping to mitigate some of the stress that my team, my staff members, my teachers in the classroom, if I don't help mitigate some of the stress that they're having from their everyday routine, their weekly task, I'm going to lessen the probability of me connecting with them on this equity initiative that's really going to change the state of being and the culture, the climate for the school. And it's the long-term thing, but it's still a new thing for them because we're going to have to unpack some practices and policies and procedures and dismantle some of them and burn them because some of the stuff has just been harmful. It's not produced what we need, right? We may look at our suspension rate and see that we've been suspending more Black girls than any other number. That's saying something. It's a whole book, Push Out by Monique Morris. A whole book out. They got a documentary on Hulu, I believe, about the young lady who was slammed by the police officer in the class. And I got to see a very wide, I didn't like the situation to begin with, so I didn't need convincing. But to see more perspective and to hear from the young lady and to hear what was going on, I had a more well-rounded perspective. And so now I can see that that is a bias issue because it happens in multiple schools all over the country. So as the leader, maybe we need to do a book study on push out. Maybe we need to have some PD on push out and what those statistics are and how they show up in our building and unpack the biases that we didn't even know we had so that our Black girls, just for this example's sake, don't continue to feel isolated. Don't continue to feel like they're being pushed out of the educational realm. They're not valued in the space. Okay. So I'm going to close, and I don't see any questions. Thank you for commenting, but I am going to get ready to close. I just want us to understand that these SMART goals are necessary. They're necessary for clarity and cohesion. Clarity on where you're going in equity, clarity and reality on where you are right now. Because if you keep lying to yourself and saying, oh, we're doing that, but I didn't hear, what did the students say? How do you know? I push back a lot against that when I hear people tell me how other folks feel and people tell me other folks' experiences, and it's not a verbatim quote or testimonial from that other person. I'm like, well, how do you know that? Okay, but what did they tell you? Did you ask them specifically what they feel? Did you see the joy? Did you hear the gratitude? How do we know we're making connection? Right? So, in order to make sure our SMART goals are bringing us clarity and cohesion, meaning cohesion with the walk, right? Your walk is reflecting what you're talking. Your walk reflects what's on your website. Your walk reflects the banners you got in front of your room. Your walks reflect the posters that are on the wall in the hallway. Your walk reflects what you say, what you're communicating. The actions actually show up behind that. So join our community, scholarsforthesoul.com/links, scholarsforthesoul.com/links, scholarsforthesoul.com/links. You can join our community. If you scroll down, it'll give you an opportunity to join our Soul Scholar community. I have been on my grind, really making sure to communicate more with the email community, and I've been doing really great for the past 2 weeks. So I'm really excited to continue ensuring that I connect and provide you with just some guidance and tools to think about, things to think about on this journey, because this can be an arduous journey. Fighting for equity in education, being culturally responsive, making sure joy and curiosity and freedom are like the way of being in your school and your teacher classroom. It's arduous. It's hard sometimes because a lot of times you get resistance from folks who just don't understand how necessary this work is. But we know that it's well worth it. And that's why I created the community. So, I've had people respond in ways to let me know they're the only one in their school building. But thank you for sending me this content and connecting with me because it's making me feel like I can do this work. I can find folks to partner with, right? I'm not alone. You got to know lives are at stake, y'all. We are in a state of emergency in education. Lives are at stake. We don't have time to keep playing. We don't have time for teachers to keep walking out the school building. We don't have time for students to keep fighting every day. My daughter's at school. She said there's been a fight every day the last 2 weeks in high school. And I'm like, nothing being done. You can't actually change it in education. So like, again, we continue to treat the root of the fruit and not get down to the roots. I'm about to send a proposal. Hey, you don't have to you need somebody to come in and restorative practices environment. But this is conflict in students not knowing how to regulate and not understanding how to work with community. Their load is called extraneous cognitive load. So they've got that all in their mind. Their mind is on everything, doing all the things, right? Okay. So I you with the what you call it with my service. So I'm not really sure where we left off. Let me see if I can see. Okay. Not really sure where we left off, but I was closing out. And so I'll say my last little part again. Re- Remember that. Okay. Let's come back. All right. So remind yourself and remember to yourself that this is important. Lives are at stake. Your leadership can make the difference in producing environments that foster empathy, justice, care, and inclusivity, right? So that is nearly impossible for young people to fall through the cracks. Right? And teachers are not going to not feel agency. There's confidence in their own abilities, their own professional roles. That all has to start with you. If you're a leader, the work with All right, so I am done today. Thank you so much for connecting. Again, you see on top of dinner here. Be sure to follow us on onto Instagram. But you can also send us email at info info